The signal arrived at 0347 hours, slipping through the noise of Jupiter's magnetosphere like a needle through silk. No one caught it at first. It was Dr. Yora Osei at the Deep Space Listening Array who flagged it, not because the signal was loud, but because it was patient. It pulsed at intervals too regular to be geological, too complex to be electromagnetic interference, and too alien to fit any human encoding schema she had ever studied. By morning it was on the director's desk. By noon it was on the Secretary General's. By the following Tuesday, Captain Marcus Webb had his orders. Marcus was 41 years old, lean in the way that long stretches in low gravity made people lean, with grey starting at his temples and a scar beneath his left eye from a decompression accident that happened so long ago he had stopped thinking about it. He had commanded 2 deep space survey missions, 1 emergency salvage operation near the Jovian Trojans, and a classified reconnaissance pass over Titan's northern sea that he was not allowed to discuss at dinner parties. He was not the most decorated captain in the fleet, but he was the one they called when the situation was genuinely strange. That reputation had followed him like a shadow for 15 years, and it suited him fine. His crew for this mission was small by design. Mission Control had decided that a large presence might be perceived as threatening. To whom or to what, they carefully did not specify, because specifying it would have required admitting just how little they understood about what was waiting out there. So Marcus flew with 5. Lieutenant Commander Priya Nair, his first officer, who had a gift for staying calm in the exact moments when calmness seemed physiologically impossible. Chief Engineer Oskar Brandt, a broad-shouldered man from Reykjavik who loved machinery the way other men loved their families and had never once met a system he couldn't coax back to life. Dr. Sable Okafor, xenobiologist, whose previous claim to fame had been the discovery of microbial life in the hydrothermal vents beneath Europa's ice, a discovery that now felt almost quaint given what she was flying toward. Sergeant Dae-Jung Kwon, security, compact and precise, who had said almost nothing during the entire 14-day transit except to confirm that his equipment was properly calibrated. And Ensign Tomoko Reyes, systems analyst, 26 years old, on her first deep space deployment, who had spent most of the journey staring at the sensor readouts with an expression that Marcus could not quite classify as fear or wonder or both at once. They saw it from 300,000 kilometers out, and seeing it made no immediate sense. The human brain, built by evolution to assess threats and opportunities on the scale of savannas, is not equipped to feel the correct emotion when confronted with an object 12 kilometers long. What Marcus felt first was not but rather a kind of flat disbelief, the same sensation he imagined one would feel upon opening a door in one's own house and finding an ocean on the other side. The object was vast in the way that geography is vast. It occupied space not as a thing within space but as a redefinition of what that region of space could mean. It floated at a slight angle relative to the ecliptic, slow tumbling at roughly 2 degrees per hour, its surface dark and textured like the bark of some enormous dead tree, furrowed with ridges and channels that the sensors insisted were not geological formations but something else entirely, something regular and intentional and impossible to name. "It's not metal," Sable said, the first time she said it. She would say it 4 more times over the next 6 hours, each time with slightly different emphasis, as though searching for an inflection that would make the fact feel real. The spectrographic return is, "I don't have a comparison. It's not metal, it's not composite, it's not any mineral compound on record. The closest analog I can find is keratin." "Like fingernails," Oskar said. "Like fingernails," Sable agreed, and then was quiet for a while. The distress signal was still broadcasting. It had not changed in pitch or cadence since Dr. Osei first detected it. Whatever was generating it had been generating it for an unknown length of time. The decay analysis suggested decades at minimum, possibly longer. Marcus had been briefed that the signal contained layered information that the xenolinguistics teams were still working through, but that the outermost layer, the one most obviously intended to be decoded first, appeared to mean something functionally equivalent to "we are here, we are in distress, approach with caution." He had been told this with the careful precision of a bureaucrat who was aware that any part of that translation could be completely wrong. They matched velocity at 2 kilometers out and spent a full day in passive observation before Marcus made the call to approach. During that day, Sable catalogued what the sensors could reach. The surface of the vessel, if vessel was the right word, and increasingly it did not feel like the right word, was covered in structures that resembled nothing so much as pores. Billions of them, distributed across the dark exterior in patterns that shifted when you looked at one area long enough, the way a murmuration of starlings shifts, not individually but as a whole. The interior showed up on deep radar as a complex of chambers and passages that bore a disturbing resemblance to a circulatory system. There were no visible thrusters. There were no visible weapons. There was no visible anything that Marcus could point to and say that is the part that a civilization built, because nothing about the object suggested it had been built at all. It suggested instead that it had grown. The entry point presented itself on the third approach pass. A section of the surface approximately 40 meters wide had distended outward slightly, the pores in that region aligned in a rough circle, a configuration that Sable described as sphincteral and then immediately apologized for describing that way before clarifying that it was nonetheless the most accurate word available. Marcus looked at the circle of aligned pores for a long time. He thought about the families of the 5 people behind him. He thought about the Secretary-General's careful language, "You have discretionary authority over entry decisions." He thought about the signal, patient and repeating, that had been broadcasting for decades into the dark like a lighthouse built by someone who had started to doubt that anyone was looking. He took them in. The suit lights carved cones of white into a darkness so complete it felt structural. They moved through the entry corridor in single file, Quan at the front, Marcus behind him, Priya behind Marcus, then Oscar, Sable, and Tomoko bringing up the rear with her sensor array already running. The walls of the corridor were warm through Marcus's suit, not alarmingly so, but noticeably, the kind of warmth that radiated from something alive rather than something mechanical. He ran his gloved hand along the surface as he moved and felt the faint pulse beneath his fingertips, slow and massive, something in the range of 4 beats per minute, a heart the size of a small moon keeping time. He did not mention this to the crew. He filed it in the part of his mind where he kept things he would think about later when he had the luxury of later. They had been inside for 11 minutes when Quan stopped and Marcus nearly walked into his back. "Contact," Quan said, and nothing else, because the word was sufficient. The chamber they had entered was larger than anything that should have been inside the section of hull they had passed through, a spatial impossibility that Tomoko would spend 3 hours trying to account for before concluding that the vessel's interior geometry did not correspond to its exterior in any way her instruments could currently model. The chamber was roughly oval, perhaps 200 meters at its widest, and every surface was covered in the same dark bark-like material, ridged and channeled, and distributed throughout that material were openings about the size of a human fist through which a very faint bioluminescence pulsed, the same slow rhythm that Marcus had felt through his gloves. And on the floor of the chamber, covering approximately 2/3 of its total area, were the dead. They lay in postures that had frozen and then dried over what must have been a very long time, their bodies desiccated and contorted, their forms visible beneath the dim pulse of the chamber's light. They were not human. They were between 2 and 2.5 meters tall, with elongated limbs that suggested a 3-jointed arm structure, with torsos broader at the base than at the shoulder, with heads that bore a cluster of sensory organs where a human face would be, 4 of what might have been eyes arranged in a horizontal line, below them a wide flat respiratory structure, below that the suggestion of a mouth. Their skin or hide had dried to a greyish-brown in death. Many of them bore damage. Not environmental damage, not the kind of deterioration that happened to a body left to time. Structural damage. Penetrating wounds. The kind of damage that was done by one body to another body deliberately. They killed each other, Priya said. It was not a question. Thousands of them, Sable said quietly. She was already moving between the bodies with a slow reverence, crouching here and there, her scanner making soft sounds. "I'm getting organic residue consistent with tissue and fluid from multiple individuals on the wound sites. There are traces of what might be incendiary compounds. Some of them have evidence of burning. This wasn't disease. This wasn't structural failure. This was..." "A war," Marcus said. "A war," she agreed. They spent 4 hours in the first chamber cataloguing what they could. The dead were distributed unevenly. Concentrations near certain passages suggested last stands, or ambushes, or rallying points. Quan moved through the space with the professional attention of someone who had spent a career reading the geometry of violence, and his quiet observations painted a picture gradually. The fighting had moved through the chamber from multiple directions simultaneously. There were 2 distinct wound types, suggesting at minimum 2 different weapons or 2 different groups wielding different means of harm. The bioluminescence of the chamber walls shifted in color very slightly when Tomoko played back certain audio frequencies, which she noticed by accident and then stared at for a long time without saying anything until Priya asked her what was wrong. "I don't think it's decorative," Tomoko said. "The light response. I think this wall is reacting to sound. I think it might be listening. Everything else seems to suggest this thing is alive," Oscar said from where he was crouching beside a conduit-like structure in the wall that he had been studying for the last 40 minutes. "I can confirm that these passages carry fluid. Warm, pressurized, circulating. This is not plumbing. This is anatomy." He paused. "This vessel is an organism." The word landed in the room and changed it. They had known it intellectually. Sable had been building toward it for hours, the evidence accumulating in one direction with the patient inevitability of a tide. But hearing Oscar say it plainly, in his flat Icelandic matter-of-fact voice, was different from knowing it. Marcus looked at the walls, at the pulsing light, at the warm dark surfaces that were not metal and not composite and not mineral but were instead alive, and understood that they were standing inside a living thing the way bacteria lived inside a gut. He was still thinking about this when the walls sealed them in. There was no sound. That was the part Marcus would remember afterward, not the closing itself but the silence of it. He turned to look at the corridor they had entered through, and it was simply not there. The wall where the corridor had been was whole and smooth and pulsing gently with the same faint rhythm as everything else, as if the corridor had never existed, as if the organism had simply exhaled and absorbed the gap. Quan was at the wall within 4 seconds, pressing his gloves against it, scanning it, finding nothing. Marcus activated his comm to the ship and got the flat non-sound of total blockage. The hull density between them and their vessel had apparently increased past anything his equipment could penetrate. "All right," Marcus said. He waited until he was certain his voice was steady before he said anything else. "Let's be methodical." Priya was already running through their supply inventory, talking quietly and efficiently, translating her fear into arithmetic the way she always did. They had 7 days of oxygen if they were careful. 4 days of food. Water recyclers at full function. Their suits were functional at temperature. They had 3 communication frequencies, all of which were now returning static. They were sealed inside a living organism that had decided, for reasons entirely its own, that they should stay. "It's not attacking us," Sable said. "Not yet," Quan said. "It hasn't done anything threatening since we entered. The sealing of the exit is the only change in behavior. And the distress signal," Sable pulled up her recorder. "The signal is still broadcasting. Externally. From the hull. Whatever is broadcasting, it hasn't changed its behavior." "Which means what?" Marcus asked. "I don't know what it means. But I think there's a difference between a trap that broadcasts distress signals for decades and then eats whatever comes in, and a living organism that," she stopped. "Started again. I think this thing wanted us here. Not to harm us. I think it needed us to come inside for something." "That's extraordinarily speculative," Priya said. "Yes," Sable agreed. "But I'd like to offer it as a working hypothesis rather than assuming the alternative, because the alternative requires us to spend our remaining oxygen in despair, and I'd prefer not to do that." They went deeper. There was not, precisely, a choice in the matter. The sealed exit had removed one option. The chambers ahead remained open, each passage yielding to the next, the bioluminescence brightening very slightly as they moved forward as though the organism was illuminating the path it wanted them to take. Marcus was aware that this could be interpreted ominously, a law, a digestive system drawing food toward its center. He chose not to interpret it that way because Sable was right that the alternative was despair, and because something else was pulling at his attention. The deeper they went, the more detailed the dead became as a record. The distribution of bodies told a story in the architecture of violence. In the outer chambers, the dead were mixed, 2 groups interleaved, fighting through each other. But as the crew moved inward, the pattern changed. In the middle chambers, the dead were predominantly one type, slightly larger, with a subtle structural difference in the arm joints, wearing what appeared to be some form of adornment on the sensory cluster where a face would be, narrow bands of a dark material that might have been decorative or might have been functional or might have been both. These ones had died facing inward, toward the heart of the ship. They had been pushing inward when they died. And the wounds on these ones were different, not the penetrating injuries of the outer chambers, but burns. Something had burned them from a distance, from inside, and they had fallen pushing forward and never reached whatever was at the center. They were trying to get to something, Marcus said. And something was defending it. "Someone," Sable said. She was kneeling beside one of the burned ones, her scanner running. "The burn pattern is directional. Coming from a point source, further inside. Something alive was doing this." "Was alive," Quan said. "This happened a long time ago." "Maybe," Sable said, and her voice had a careful quality that Marcus had learned to pay attention to. The Inner Sanctum, and no other word quite fit, was a chamber perhaps 50 meters in diameter, nearly spherical, with walls that blazed with bioluminescence compared to what they had seen outside, every pore in the surface active and cycling through a slow rhythm of light that moved in waves from ceiling to floor. The center of the chamber contained a structure unlike anything else in the organism's interior, a dense network of fibrous material, biological in composition but assembled with an intent that was unmistakably deliberate, forming a rough sphere about 3 meters across. The sphere was suspended from the walls by 100 or more cables of living tissue, and within it, visible through the fibrous outer layer, something was moving. Not much. Not fast. The slow movement of something that had been very still for a very long time and was just now becoming aware that stillness might no longer be necessary. "It's alive," Sable whispered. The crew stood at the edge of the chamber and did not move, because moving felt like a decision with consequences they could not yet calculate. What was inside the sphere was visible in pieces through the fibrous weave, a limb here, the curve of something that might be a head there, the same basic form as the dead outside but somehow different, somehow particular in a way that an individual is particular and a crowd is not. "The ship protected it," Marcus said slowly. All of those burned bodies in the middle chambers. Something in here was defending this. This is what they were trying to reach. And whatever was trying to reach it, Priya said, thinking aloud, following the logic, is the other type. The ones in the outer chambers. They were fighting each other for access to this. She paused. Or fighting to prevent access. Or. "Look at the burns," Quan said. He had moved to examine one of the bodies at the chamber entrance. There were 3 of them here, the last of the ones who had died pushing inward. These are old. Very old. But the direction is consistent with what we've seen throughout. The ones trying to get in, burned by something from inside. He straightened. Whatever is in that sphere, one faction of these aliens was trying to protect it. The other was trying to reach it. The ones trying to reach it lost. "Why would you fight a war," Marcus said, more to himself than to the crew, "to reach one single individual?" Sable was at the sphere now, not touching it, moving around its circumference slowly. Metabolic activity is low but stable. Whatever's inside has been in a state of reduced function for a long time. It's not dead. It's been, I want to say hibernating, but that's not quite right. It's been contained. These tissue cables, she touched one gently and it responded, contracting slightly. These aren't just supporting the sphere. They're restraining it. She looked at Marcus. "I think this is a prison," she said. The word hit him the same way the word organism had hit him, with the weight of a concept arriving fully formed in a place he hadn't been ready to receive it. He looked at the sphere, at the form moving slowly within it, waking up, and then at the walls of the chamber, at the 1,000 dead in the passages behind them, at the architecture of everything they had walked through, and it assembled itself suddenly and completely in his mind the way a puzzle completes at the last piece. The ship was not an abandoned vessel. The ship was a prison transport. The civil war they had walked through, 2 factions, one pushing in, one pushing back, was not a war for the ship. It was a war for the prisoner. One side trying to free him. One side trying to stop that freeing. Both sides now dead, and the ship's own biological systems, its immune response, its instinct, whatever passed in a living vessel for the drive to maintain its purpose, had kept the prisoner contained even after everyone was gone, broadcasting its distress signal into space for decades, saying, "I am here, I am in distress, come and help me finish what I was built to do." And Marcus Webb, because he was the one they called when the situation was genuinely strange, had come inside with 5 people and not understood any of this until now. "When we entered," he said, "when we came through the outer wall. The entry point aligned itself for us," Tomoko said, who had been very quiet for a long time and had apparently been doing the same arithmetic Marcus was now doing. "It let us in. And then it sealed us in." "Because," Marcus said, "because it needed someone to make a decision. About what's in that sphere." Tomoko's voice was steady in the way that meant she was frightened and was working through it. "The factions are dead. The crew, whatever crew this thing had, they're dead. The organism can maintain the prison indefinitely, it's been doing it for decades, but it can't adjudicate. It can't decide. It brought us in because it needed someone who could decide." The form in the sphere was fully awake now. Marcus could see it clearly, an individual of the same species as the dead outside, the same 3-jointed limb structure, the same horizontal arrangement of sensory organs, but this one in a state that suggested not just life but attention. The 4 eyes, he was going to call them eyes because he needed to call them something, were all oriented toward Marcus. There was no readable expression in the alien face, he lacked the evolutionary context to decode whatever signals it was sending. But it was watching him. Had probably been watching all of them since they entered the chamber. Then it did something that none of them expected. It spoke. Not in any sound Marcus could hear. Tomoko's audio sensors caught something in a frequency range he would need translation software to process, but in light. The bioluminescence in the walls of the chamber shifted, patterned, responded to some signal from the figure in the sphere in a way that moved through the room like a wave, like language, like an address. "It's communicating with the ship," Sable said. "Through the walls. The ship is, it's answering." The pattern exchange, She was watching her scanner with the expression of someone trying to drink from a waterfall. I can't decode the content. But it's clearly bidirectional. He's been able to do this the whole time. He's been waiting. Waiting for someone to come, Marcus said. Waiting for someone who could let him out, Priya said. She looked at Marcus with a level expression that contained everything they were both thinking. That's the decision. Marcus stood in front of the sphere for a long time. His oxygen indicator told him he had 6 days and 14 hours left. The ship had sealed them in. The prisoner, the war criminal, maybe, who knew what he had done or what the factions outside had wanted from him or wanted done to him, was awake and watching and waiting. And somewhere out there, through the living hull of this organism, the Cassini-3 was also waiting, crewed by no one because Marcus had brought everyone inside, orbiting patiently in the cold dark near Jupiter. He thought about what Sable had said. That the ship needed someone who could decide. He thought about the signal that had been broadcasting for decades. Not a weapon. Not a lure. A lighthouse, patient in the dark, built by a civilization that understood the difference between holding someone prisoner and having the authority to judge them. He thought about the bodies in the outer chambers, the ones who had come to free this individual, and the bodies in the middle chambers, the ones who had died stopping them. He had no way to know which side had been right. He had no way to know what this alien had done or what the two factions had wanted. He was a captain from a species that hadn't known other intelligent life existed until 14 years ago, standing inside a living prison ship, being asked to make a decision that the civilization who built it had failed to resolve. Sable, he said. If I open it, if the ship's biology allows us to open it, what are the chances it kills us immediately? She thought for a moment. The ship sealed us in rather than destroy us. The ship has kept this individual contained rather than destroyed him. The entire behavioral profile of this organism suggests constraint rather than aggression. If whatever's inside wanted to kill us, it's had time. She paused. That said, Marcus agreed. He looked at Quan, who gave a fractional nod that Marcus read correctly as I'm ready either way. He stepped forward to the sphere and pressed both gloved hands against the fibrous outer layer. He had no idea if the gesture would mean anything. He had no protocol for this. There was no protocol for this. There was only the fact that he was here, and the organism was watching, and the prisoner was watching, and everything that had happened in the long silent time since the Civil War had led, through some logic he would never fully understand, to this exact moment and his exact hands against the living wall of this exact cell. The sphere opened. It did not rupture or dissolve, it unfurled, the tissue cables releasing in sequence from the ceiling down, the fibrous layer peeling back with a slowness that suggested the organism doing something reluctant but genuine, a jailer who had carried the weight of custody for too long and was finally, carefully, putting it down. The alien stepped out. He was taller than Marcus by half a meter, and he moved with the careful precision of someone reacquainting themselves with the specific coordinates of their own limbs after a very long confinement. He looked at Marcus for what felt like a long time but was probably 6 seconds. Then he looked at the walls. Then he looked at the dead in the passage behind them, visible from where he stood. He made a sound. Tomoko's instruments caught the full frequency range of it. Later, when the translation software had been built, and it was built, over months, with the alien's patient participation, she would describe that sound as something between a mourning and an apology. He had not wanted this. None of this had been what he wanted. But here they all were, in the aftermath of things that had been wanted and done and now could not be undone. Then he looked at Marcus again and did something with his sensory cluster that Sable would later conclude was the closest analog his species had to a deliberate smile. He pointed at the wall. Then at the passage. Then outward, toward the hull, toward space. He wanted out. And then, before Marcus could begin to process how they were going to accomplish that, the walls began to change. Not the slow bioluminescent pulse they had been watching for hours, something faster, something urgent, something that moved through the chamber in a wave and continued through the passage behind them and presumably through every chamber of the organism simultaneously, a biological alarm so large it felt like weather. Tomoko grabbed Marcus's arm before she said anything. Signal, she said. External. Not from us. Not from the ship. She was looking at her sensor array with an intensity that had moved past fear into something cleaner. Multiple contacts. Moving fast. Decelerating toward our position. She looked up. Something else heard the distress signal. Something else was already coming, the alien said. Everyone turned. The alien had not, as far as any of them knew, spoken before. What had arrived was not exactly sound. It was a frequency pattern that Tomoko's equipment had translated into something that her speakers rendered as sound, crude and approximate, English phonemes approximated from an alien mouth, but intelligible in the way that a hand signal is intelligible across a language barrier. "You know what's coming," Marcus said. "I know," the alien said. "They come for me. They always come for me." A pause, while the translation software worked and the frequency modulation adapted. "They are why I was placed here. Not my own kind. Not the factions you see. I was placed here to be away from them." Another pause. "You have made a mistake in freeing me." "I figured that out about 10 seconds ago," Marcus said. "And yet you do not seem distressed," the alien said. "I'm extremely distressed," Marcus said. "I'm just quiet about it." Tomoko's instruments were updating rapidly now. 7 contacts. Accelerating from behind Jupiter's moon shadow, they were hiding there, waiting. They must have picked up the change in the ship's bioluminescent signature when the sphere opened. Or, she stopped. Or they've been watching for a very long time and this was always going to happen the moment someone went inside. "How long before intercept?" Marcus asked. 40 minutes. Maybe 50. The alien was communicating with the ship again, the light patterns flowing through the walls in rapid exchange, and Marcus watched this happening and thought about the organism around them. 12 kilometers of living prison, ancient and patient, that had maintained its purpose for decades through a civil war and the death of every living thing inside it except one. He thought about what 12 kilometers of living organism, with 4 decades of pent-up biological function, might be capable of. "What are you asking it?" Marcus said. The alien looked at him, and there was something in the arrangement of those 4 horizontal eyes, something in their orientation, their focus, the subtle movement of the tissue around them, that Marcus would later try to describe and find he couldn't describe adequately in any language he had. "I am asking it to be a weapon," the alien said. "I am asking it to remember what it was built to do and to do it differently." "It was built to contain you," Priya said. "It was built to protect," the alien said. "The containment was a method. The protection was the purpose." He paused. "Protection does not have to flow in only one direction." The bioluminescence shifted again, not the alarm pattern now but something slower, something considered, something that moved through the walls like a decision being made in the deep tissue of a very large mind. Marcus felt the vibration in the floor change. Felt something in the organism's structure shift, a repurposing that went through the living hull like a held breath slowly released. The alien looked at Marcus again. "They are 12 ships," he said. "They destroyed my civilization's penal fleet. They have been hunting me for 40 years because I am the last one who knows what they are and where they come from and what they are planning to do to your world and every other warm world in this system." He let that settle. "I was not imprisoned for what I did. I was imprisoned to keep me safe. To keep what I know safe." Marcus thought about this. "What did your faction want?" he asked. "The ones who were trying to reach you. The ones burning in the middle chambers." "They wanted to free me to fight," the alien said. "And the ones who stopped them. They wanted to keep me safe at any cost. Even the cost of the ship. Even the cost of themselves." He was quiet for a moment. They were both right. In different proportions. The organism around them was fully awake now, not the dormant maintenance activity of 4 decades but something active and purposeful and large. The walls were dense with moving light. The whole structure was vibrating at a frequency Marcus could feel in his chest, the heartbeat of something 12 kilometers long that had been waiting to be needed. "So what do we do?" Marcus said. The alien looked at him and the arrangement of his eyes suggested something that Marcus would later classify as respect, though he would never be entirely sure. "You have a ship," the alien said. "Small. Fast. I have seen its profile through the outer hull sensors. It is still there. The organism did not confuse it with a threat. Your ship and my knowledge and this organism's," he paused, choosing a word that his translation approximated as anger. "Together." "And you," Marcus said. "What do you contribute?" "I know exactly where each of the 12 ships will be in 38 minutes, the alien said. "I know their formation and their weapons and their weaknesses and the specific navigational logic their pilots use in a pursuit situation. I have been thinking about this moment for 40 years. Another pause. "I have had a great deal of time to think." Marcus turned to look at his crew. Priya, who was already running calculations in her head with an expression of focused serenity. Oscar, who was looking at the organism's walls with the specific attention he gave to machinery he was considering incorporating into a plan. Sable, who was watching the alien with the expression of someone standing at the edge of a vast new continent. Kwon, who had already shifted his weight into a stance that Marcus recognized as ready. And Tomoko, the youngest of them, on her first deep space mission, who looked at Marcus and gave him a small nod that contained everything he needed from her. He turned back to the alien. "Tell me your name," Marcus said. The alien produced a frequency pattern that Tomoko's speaker rendered as something between a hum and a chord. "In your language," he said, "the closest word is Varek." "Marcus Webb," Marcus said. He extended his gloved hand, because it was the only gesture of alliance he had available, and waited. Varek looked at the hand for a moment. He had been watching humans for 40 minutes. He was a scientist, Marcus would learn later, before he was a prisoner, before he was the last keeper of knowledge his civilization had. He extended one of his three-jointed arms and placed his equivalent of a hand against Marcus's glove. The handshake was not elegant. It was probably not even correctly understood on Varek's side as a gesture of the precise kind Marcus intended. But it communicated something, the specific quality of two kinds of intelligent life deciding, at the edge of danger, to stand in the same direction. "Okay," Marcus said. He activated his crew channel. "Oscar, I need you to tell me what this organism can do offensively. Priya, coordinate with Tomoko on intercept geometry. Kwon, you're with me and Varek for navigation planning. Sable, talk to Varek. You've got 35 minutes and I need everything he knows in a form we can use." "Captain," Sable said, and she was already moving toward Varek with her scanner and her translator interface and the same focused excitement she had worn on the day she found life in the Europa vents, except larger now, because this time the life could talk back. The next 32 minutes were the most concentrated work of Marcus Webb's life. He moved through them the way he moved through every crisis, not by eliminating fear but by finding the place in his chest where it sat and putting everything else in front of it, building urgency and task and procedure like a barricade between himself and the thing that wanted to shut him down. Varek's knowledge was extraordinary and precise. The 12 ships were an advance force, fast, heavily armed, designed for pursuit and elimination rather than invasion. They operated in a formation that exploited blind spots in conventional sensor arrays but that the organism's distributed biology perceived as clearly as Marcus perceived the room around him. Varek knew their weapons because he had been present when they were first developed, an unwilling witness who had remembered everything in 40 years of containment and organized it into something that could be used. What the organism could do was, once Oscar had spent 20 minutes in furious consultation with the walls, considerably more than any of them had expected. The living hull was not just skin, it was a system, and like any biological system it had defenses that could be deployed at will. The pores that had fascinated Sable from the moment of their approach were not merely respiratory. They could focus and direct the electromagnetic output of the organism's own biological processes, the vast bioelectric field generated by 12 kilometers of living tissue, into something that, aimed and calibrated, would make the shielding of a conventional spacecraft experience significant difficulties. "It's not a weapon," Oscar said, talking fast, "but it doesn't have to be a weapon. A focused bioelectric pulse at the right frequency disrupts their navigation systems." Varek confirmed the frequency specifics, and at that point their formation logic falls apart. "They can't recalibrate faster than we can move." "And the Cassini?" Marcus asked. "Can maneuver into the gaps in the formation once they break," Priya said. "Varek's navigation projections give us 3 intercept windows in the first 4 minutes. After that it becomes less predictable." "Less predictable is fine," Marcus said. "Less predictable is better than none." They broke the hull seal 6 minutes before intercept. The organism opened a passage for them with the same unhurried certainty it had used to seal one behind them, as though it had been following the conversation and understood perfectly what was needed and when. Varek came with them, fitted awkwardly into a spare suit that Oscar had spent an impressive 12 minutes modifying to accommodate a body plan evolution had never intended for human equipment. He moved through the passage with the focused deliberateness of someone who had spent 40 years imagining this exact walk and was determined to perform it correctly. They boarded the Cassini in the last minutes before the 12 ships completed their deceleration arc. The first pulse from the organism lit up Marcus's rear sensors like a slow sunrise, vast, blue-white, beautiful and terrible. The formation, as Varek had predicted, came apart. The second and third pulses, spaced at intervals Varek directed from the co-pilot's seat while Tomoko scrambled to translate his frequency instructions into terms Oscar could input into the ship's communication array, caught 2 more ships in the process of recalibration and left them drifting. Marcus flew the gaps that Priya called out with a precision born of 15 years doing exactly this in situations that had been considerably less strange than this one. It was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was more like a conversation, Between the organism's vast patient biology and 12 ships that had not expected to encounter anything except a single helpless prisoner, between 40 years of Varek's accumulated knowledge and the specific tactical intelligence of a fleet that had underestimated the variable of what happened when things designed to hold were also capable of acting. 5 of the 12 ships retreated. 3 more were disabled, for were damaged badly enough to require extended recovery time. None of them were destroyed, which was a fact Marcus noted with a complicated feeling he would unpack at length in the quiet months afterward. When it was over, Marcus sat in the pilot's seat for a long time in the ringing silence of a spacecraft that had just survived something it had not been designed for. Varek sat beside him. Through the viewport, the organism turned slowly in the dark near Jupiter, its surface pulsing with a bioluminescence that was slower now, quieter, the rhythm of something that had done what it needed to do and was returning to the long patience of its own deep time. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now," Varek said, through Tomoko's speaker at a fidelity that was improving by the hour, "I tell you what I know. Everything I know. About who those ships belong to. About what they want. About what is coming toward your world and the worlds of my people and every other warm, living place in this part of space." He paused. "It will take some time." "We have time," Marcus said. "Yes," Varek said. He was looking at the organism through the viewport, and whatever the arrangement of his eyes communicated was something Marcus was only just beginning to learn to read, but he thought it might be grief and gratitude and the specific solemnity of someone who has been a prisoner so long that freedom feels like a weight as much as a relief. "I have been saying things to silence for 40 years. It will take some adjustment, saying them to someone who can hear." "Say whatever you need to say," Marcus told him. "We'll listen to all of it." The organism pulsed once, long and slow, in the dark. Marcus watched it and thought that whatever it was, prison, guardian, soldier, organism, creature, vessel, something he had no category for yet, it had done the thing it was built to do, in the end, even if the doing of it had looked different from what was intended. He thought that there was something worth holding on to in that, though he couldn't yet articulate precisely what it was. He keyed the comm to mission control. He could already hear, in his imagination, the silence on the other end of the line when he started his report, the long, processing silence of institutions confronting information that required them to become different institutions than they had been. He had 18 days of transit back to Earth to figure out how to tell the story in a way that would be believed and acted upon. He had Varek, who had 40 years of knowledge and the patience that only very long confinement teaches. He had 5 crew members who had seen things that would live in them permanently, the way important things live in you, not comfortable, not simple, but true. He pressed transmit. "This is Captain Marcus Webb of the survey vessel Cassini-3, he said. "We are en route to Earth. We have made contact. I have a lot to tell you, and I need you to understand that none of it is what anyone expected, but all of it is important. Please clear your schedules." He released the transmit key. Outside, Jupiter hung vast and banded in the dark, and beside it the organism turned with its slow patient rhythm, and somewhere in the retreating distance the 5 surviving ships of the advance force were carrying back their failure to whoever had sent them, and the universe was the same universe it had been before all of this began, except that now there was one more person in it who knew what was coming, and one more person who would tell. Marcus Webb took a breath, put the Cassini-3 on course for home, and waited to see what kind of world he was returning to. It was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was more like a conversation, between the organism's vast patient biology and 12 ships that had not expected to encounter anything except a single helpless prisoner, between 40 years of Varek's accumulated knowledge and the specific tactical intelligence of a fleet that had underestimated the variable of what happened when things designed to hold were also capable of acting. 5 of the 12 ships retreated. 3 more were disabled, for were damaged badly enough to require extended recovery time. None of them were destroyed, which was a fact Marcus noted with a complicated feeling he would unpack at length in the quiet months afterward. When it was over, Marcus sat in the pilot's seat for a long time in the ringing silence of a spacecraft that had just survived something it had not been designed for. Varek sat beside him. Through the viewport, the organism turned slowly in the dark near Jupiter, its surface pulsing with a bioluminescence that was slower now, quieter, the rhythm of something that had done what it needed to do and was returning to the long patience of its own deep time. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now," Varek said, through Tomoko's speaker at a fidelity that was improving by the hour, "I tell you what I know. Everything I know. About who those ships belong to. About what they want. About what is coming toward your world and the worlds of my people and every other warm, living place in this part of space." He paused. "It will take some time." "We have time," Marcus said. "Yes," Varek said. He was looking at the organism through the viewport, and whatever the arrangement of his eyes communicated was something Marcus was only just beginning to learn to read, but he thought it might be grief and gratitude and the specific solemnity of someone who has been a prisoner so long that freedom feels like a weight as much as a relief. I have been saying things to silence for 40 years. It will take some adjustment, saying them to someone who can hear. Say whatever you need to say, Marcus told him. We'll listen to all of it. The organism pulsed once, long and slow, in the dark. Marcus watched it and thought that whatever it was, prison, guardian, soldier, organism, creature, vessel, something he had no category for yet, it had done the thing it was built to do, in the end, even if the doing of it had looked different from what was intended. He thought that there was something worth holding on to in that, though he couldn't yet articulate precisely what it was. He keyed the comm to mission control. He could already hear, in his imagination, the silence on the other end of the line when he started his report, the long, processing silence of institutions confronting information that required them to become different institutions than they had been. He had 18 days of transit back to Earth to figure out how to tell the story in a way that would be believed and acted upon. He had Varek, who had 40 years of knowledge and the patience that only very long confinement teaches. He had 5 crew members who had seen things that would live in them permanently, the way important things live in you, not comfortable, not simple, but true. He pressed transmit. This is Captain Marcus Webb of the survey vessel Cassini-3, he said. We are en route to Earth. We have made contact. I have a lot to tell you, and I need you to understand that none of it is what anyone expected, but all of it is important. Please clear your schedules. He released the transmit key. Outside, Jupiter hung vast and banded in the dark, and beside it the organism turned with its slow patient rhythm, and somewhere in the retreating distance the 5 surviving ships of the advance force were carrying back their failure to whoever had sent them, and the universe was the same universe it had been before all of this began, except that now there was one more person in it who knew what was coming, and one more person who would tell. Marcus Webb took a breath, put the Cassini-3 on course for home, and waited to see what kind of world he was returning to.